Hello everyone, I'm Professor Mark Baines with Concordia University in Irvine, and today we are talking about youth, older, and female athletes and performance nutrition in our second to final week of our course with Advanced Exercise Physiology and Exercise Physiology for Sport. Before we get into that, we'll talk about a few concepts that are important for us to discuss from previous weeks and important in general, of course. First and foremost, when selecting a test to assess certain capability or ability or skill when it comes to athletic performance, when we're talking about agility, that test should be testing the designated triphosphate creatine phosphate energy system, more the type 2X muscle fibers, should be 10 seconds or less, like any ultra short anaerobic power type test would be. So it needs to be a very, very short test. And of course, anaerobic power, same concept, 10 seconds or less. And someone can argue reasonably that 5 seconds or less would really be absolute maximal power from the standpoint of ATP only lasting a maximum of about 5 seconds before kicking in with a creatine phosphate primary energy system right after that. Still type 2X muscle fibers in that general time frame. Start going beyond 10 seconds, we start getting into glycolysis, so it goes more toward closer and closer toward anaerobic threshold, lactate threshold, and whatnot. When it comes to anaerobic threshold, technically, the anaerobic threshold occurs after the lactate threshold. So if we're not doing a test where we're taking blood every couple minutes, we're a very sophisticated test with people in the technology to be able to utilize such a test. We'd be doing anaerobic threshold type test or ventilatory threshold type test. And that's the point where we start moving in toward anaerobic type energy beyond aerobic type energy. And what we're really looking at is skeletal muscle adaptation. So if we're running versus cycling versus swimming or whatever we're doing, the muscles that we're using in the given exercise are incrementally increasing. That lactate is producing at a higher and higher level. We're seeing more and more hydrogen ions being accumulated at that point where we start passing that lactate threshold, more specifically in this case, the anaerobic threshold, which is about 12 to 17% difference from the lactate threshold, or can vary that much. We're starting to go more and more anaerobic at that moment, okay? And that's a pace we should be able to maintain for at least 10, 15, 20 minutes. And certainly in some athletes, high-level athletes, for a couple hours, okay, able to maintain that point. That's not where you're breathing hard excessively or heart rate's through the roof. You wouldn't be able to maintain such a pace for that long. We're talking about typically a person's heart rate is going to be somewhere in that 60% range on the low end to about 80-85% max heart rate, somewhere in that range, and be able to maintain a strong pace, or at least whatever pace they can maintain for that period of time, is looking at what that's their anaerobic threshold type pace, or roughly speaking lactate threshold type pace, okay? And VO2 max, of course, is faster than that, because we're talking about some pace you can handle for 10-12 minutes. So certainly your VO2 max pace is going to be faster than your anaerobic threshold or lactate threshold type pace. Between those two would be critical power. Okay. That said, we want to make sure when we are appropriately testing for 10-12 minutes for this test. AT kind of goes, you're typically testing the AT or LT, lactate threshold or anaerobic threshold, along with VO2 max type tests. We have to have the sophisticated equipment, and we cannot really accurately get our anaerobic threshold or lactate threshold without specifically measuring heart rate at given performance levels and then charting that and breaking it down, or taking blood. Okay. Otherwise, we're roughly estimating it by doing something like subjective talk test. If you can't talk in complete sentences, you're well anaerobic. You're definitely past your lactate and anaerobic thresholds. Otherwise, if you can just barely keep a full sentence and you can't really talk much more than that, you're looking like that kind of pausing, that's when you're looking at pretty much the AT, LT level right around there, your heart rate at that range, which again varies between about someone's around 60% max heart rate on the low end. For someone who's very, very fit, could be that point where they're getting their AT, and it could be, or not very fit, excuse me. Where the fit athlete might not see the AT or the LT until 80% plus 85% of their maximal heart rate, 90% even in some cases. Not normal, but it can be the case. Heart rate anaerobic threshold, as we just kind of mentioned, can be as low as 50%, 60% of the max heart rate, 90% of the max heart rate for the fit person, or the very conditioned elite type athlete, elite. Okay. Otherwise, you're looking close to that 60% range, somewhere for max heart rate, which correlates with about 50 to 85% of VO2 max, but they're not exactly the same. Now, generally speaking, having a broader perspective here, make sure we have some clarity here. Our recovery type workouts, we're talking about being 30 to 40% VO2 max, which correlates with about a 55 to 65% max heart rate, or 4 to 6 RPE. Okay, light day, really light day, recovery type day, not feeling great. Okay, or just needing the rest, but needing to move. Somewhere there's a broader range This is a 40 to 70% VO2 max, or 65% to 80% max heart rate is more that moderate type activity. The low end of that is really what people refer to as moderate activity for recovery, which is just above the recovery light days here. And of course, our anaerobic work, we're starting to get into more challenging anaerobic type work as we get that 70 to 85% VO2 max, which is about 80 to 90% max heart rate. And of course, the high intensity type stuff we're seeing even at the highest ranges of our max heart rate, of course. And VO2 max could be well above 100% VO2 max, because again, remember, that is a pace of 10 to 12 minutes. So clearly, anything you're doing for intervals that are lesser time periods than 10 minutes, we'd expect you to be above your VO2 max pace. You can't go above your maximum 100% heart rate now, can you? Keep in mind, it doesn't mean you have to have your heart rate this high, these ranges. That's the maximal range it gets to by the end of your exercise session at the highest. As opposed, it's your ceiling. Don't go more than 65% max heart rate on a light day. Don't go more than 80% max heart rate for just basic light level, moderate level aerobic type improvement. Higher intensity type stuff, don't let them get above 90% max heart rate unless they're really, really highly conditioned. Then we allow that heart rate potentially, if they're such a high level elite type athlete, to get as high as 100% max heart rate. But honestly, what should happen is they're so fit, they're so well conditioned, they're so ready for this type of exercise, we don't see anywhere near those higher end ranges of the heart rates given the goal we're working on. Okay, strength. Hypertrophy is muscle fiber growth, right? Growing muscle fibers, getting them bigger. Strength in general is neural as well as some hypertrophy involvement. They're both. And of course, power and speed are related to the neural response of type 2X muscle fibers be able to respond quickly. You could be strong, or even more. You can have size, but not necessarily be able to produce a lot of force. Okay, you can have size and not be able to produce a lot of power and speed, because coordination or motor skill also comes into play, as well as which energy systems you're using, and of course the energy demand you have available to you, or energy you have available to you for demand by the muscles. That said, we're not typically doing heart rate or VO2 max. We're talking about hypertrophy or for strength or power and speed. VO2 max, we're above 100% VO2 max. Okay, heart rate is going to be up. We're still going to use heart rate. Okay, should always use heart rate. What was your heart rate at the end of that set? You ran for 5 seconds. What's your heart rate right now? Okay, we're expecting that to be going up with each successive set. However, if your heart rate goes up and your performance does not, we're not doing something right. I cannot say it enough. Your book doesn't say that. That should be common sense. A lot of us don't use that common sense. I, as a coach, at times did not use that common sense. Certainly as an athlete, I did not. Had no idea. Now we know better. So we have to take that into account, make sure our athletes are getting better, not just pushing into poor performance, right? And of course, I always ask the RP on a scale of 1 to 10, where were they? Well, it depends very much on what our goal was, what we want to hear them say, right? And of course, our work period for hypertrophy is about 40 to 75 seconds. It's glycolytic, okay? And our rest period is about 60 to 90 seconds. That's a well-researched area. You want about 1 to 1.5 minutes of rest period for hypertrophy. And of course, the output, maximal force output, is 65 to 80%. And of course, we're talking about maximal strength. We say 1 second. No one's going to finish any set in 1 second. That's about 40 seconds. Got to really highly encourage you to stop counting reps. Don't count reps anymore. It's pointless. I just said that. Yes. Stop counting the number of times somebody does something. You lose focus on the skill itself, how well that's performed, and you're missing the point as to why it's 2 reps, 4 reps, 6 reps, 8 reps, 10 reps. It's because of time. So focus on the time. Recognition of energy systems, what we're trying to work on. Maximal strength, 10 seconds or less. Absolute max, 97, 98, 100%. Definitely 95% or above. 10 seconds or less. 1 or 2 set reps, right? But don't count the reps. Just how much can you do in that time period. If we're talking about speed, well, it's how much distance can you cover in that time period, right? Or how fast can you get through a 40-yard dash. But that said, really start thinking about how to break that down in terms of time. Stop worrying about the reps. People always want to count reps. I get that. We're all used to that. That is not physiologically the number we're looking for, because it misses a lot of important information we cannot get by just counting a number. And it also encourages someone to cheat, to use bad form to get another rep out rather than focusing on positive form and actually producing proper force with proper skill throughout a given set. Okay, and of course, rest period should be long for that type of work when we're talking about those somewhere between 1 to 40 seconds, maximal strength, focus. because we want to get ATP back fully. And now what's not shown here is that some elite top-level athletes, so we said this before, can recover full ATP in 90 seconds. So that's the absolute bare minimum rest period for that 90+% maximum force output from an athlete. But some people are more likely to take 3 to 5 minutes. As of course with the ultra short type work periods for maximal speed, maximal power, 1 to 10 seconds. Okay, and of course near maximal, we're talking about 1 to 40 seconds. Typical strength work is as high as 30-40 seconds. Okay, that's what we're looking at there. There are some basic breakdowns of force output relative to the rest periods expected and your work periods. It's all there for you. I really wish I'd had that kind of stuff years ago myself. Well, now we have it. Key factor to making sure that HIIT works is making sure we have consistent intervals. Okay, you're either getting better with each interval or you're maintaining. Now, it's too often people talk about doing sets whereby they fail, get worse with every set. That just does not make any sense. Okay, and then just taking the average of that. No, you're getting lower and lower and lower. Why don't we find whatever your maximal capability is and get as close as we can to that, and we got to seek to maintain it, or don't do that many sets. You're going to see far I would put my career as a coach, as an athlete, as a teacher, as a personal trainer, as a business owner, you name it. Put all my career on if you actually find something you can maintain properly and improve upon with each set rather than pushing into failure. Your athlete's going to be far better performer when it comes to time and competition than ever before. It's a simple thing. Make sure we do that. Okay. Now, into our next 2 chapters here for this second to final week of our course. Talk about female athletes. Female athlete triad. Menstrual dysfunction is a possibility. Of course, eating disorders or eating issues, not having the proper energy to be able to sustain for muscular demand, skeletal muscle demand to perform the work necessary. And of course, one of the reasons why, as always, heart rate goes up. Skeletal muscles having a hard time adapting to the particular stress. That's why the heart rate's rising so high. So that's what we're looking for, skeletal muscle adaptation to the stress, specific skill, specific intensity level. And of course, last part of the triad is bone mineral loss or risk of osteoporosis. So obviously we want to make sure our athletes in particular, true of males of course too, but female athletes are more susceptible to challenges by being off in their diet specifically. And the most common one, you better believe it, because everybody is told these lies, and they are lies, about carbohydrates being bad and they causing you weight gain. Well, carbohydrates do store water, yes, but weight gain, fat, no. Carbs don't make you fat. Carbs do store water. Complex carbohydrates with low glycemic index type carbohydrates are going to store 2.7 grams per gram of glycogen, roughly speaking. So you're going to have some water weight. However, that's a necessary evil, if you will, of actually having enough carbohydrate to sustain the level of performance needed. They actually shortcut those carbohydrates. Any performances are going to be requiring consistent performance over longer periods. You're going to see performance wane. It's just that simple. That's why we got to really be careful with that, of course. And it's true with proper fats and proper proteins, of course, too. We'll come back to those things. But the biggest issue is typically carbohydrates. And then secondly, I would say unquestionably, is the proper fats. Get enough fats. Today's diet these days, unless we're talking about someone's a vegetarian, okay, people are getting more than enough protein. Most people are getting far too much protein these days. It's kind of, the pendulum has swung over the last couple decades to plenty of protein. You're getting far more protein than you typically need, most people. Athletes can be challenges, and we'll have to take a closer look at that, preferably through a dietitian or a specialist in that area, as opposed to just a coach. But yeah, we've got to help them with those things. And of course, the bigger issue with for injury for our female athletes is often from a structural standpoint. That pelvic width for women is typically wider than men. That's just a structural thing. It's typical for women versus men. Not always, but typically. Okay, and of course, more importantly, the angle from that hip to the knee for women, and a lot of women, most women even, they have a much wider angle downward than the males do. So consequently, they have a greater issue with knee injury as it relates to mechanics of movement. And that's why we have to really pay attention to proper strength training, proper skill level, proper level of work and intensity and rest to make sure we're not seeing that knee seemingly buckle in. Whatever you're having your athlete do that given moment in time, not ready for it. Just not ready for it. If it's the first set, maybe not warmed up enough. Or maybe it's not strong enough in general. If they do it fine the first or second set, not the third or fourth, they don't have the endurance to be able to handle that kind of effort. So we've got to make sure that we build the endurance with them before asking them to perform at that level that many sets or that successively or for that long of a match or game or competition. Okay, strength training is where it's really going to come, and skill development, obviously, before strength training. Okay, our younger athletes, the greater concern with them is epiphyseal plate slippage. And young athletes and female athletes in general, we're talking about bone mineral loss for the women, especially as they get older with that, and let alone as they're taxing themselves at high levels of exertion, that menstrual dysfunction, hormonal levels being thrown off, making sure that the proper level of intensity is really, really vital. True of all athletes, but particularly women more so than men, because they're so much more hormonally complex. Obviously for childbearing reasons later in life if they're younger, or past earlier in life if they are older. But that said, that we want to maintain proper menstrual function, we want to maintain proper hormonal development, we have to find the right intensity and diversity of our exercise that we're giving our athletes, let alone those who are not athletes anymore. And of course for bone mineral loss, this is a big one, and again, you're going to miss this in discussion board posts. Those people who have not gone through this video are the people who are going to be getting the question from me, and should be getting the question in general when you're training in general, whether you're taking this course or randomly looking at this video because you found it somewhere. Is the key that people don't talk about. For building bone density, it's not just loading exercises or externally loaded exercises. It's specifically pushing exercises. It's specifically muscle load, that goes through the bone, not across it. Not like a curl or a tricep extension, but like a push. So basically overhead press, a squat, a deadlift, walking, jumping, running, anything that loads through the bone as you perform strength training. Any kind of resistance training. Walking is resistance training. It's still loaded. It's loaded with your body weight. So you're still going to get some bone density for the spine, for your legs. That's why the walking is the most important vital exercise long-term for any human being who wants to be able to, one, be able to keep walking and not have issues with joints long-term, or let alone bones in general, okay? But that said, for our young athletes, epiphyseal plate slippage is very, very rare. It would take a tremendous impact like falling out of a tree or basically getting hit by a car. It's very rare for young kids to actually break the epiphyseal plate. I guess it's possible, certainly in a contact sport for a young kid, for a very strong, bigger kid to be hitting a kid the wrong way and breaking that epiphyseal plate, but it's really unusual. We're talking about the end bone, the end of the humerus or the end of femur. It's unlikely it's going to happen. If it does, and it's not properly treated and with the surgery, that's the risk of that bone not growing to its full length and having abnormal bone growth in that particular bone. Some people ask the question, can a young athlete handle the same work durations and volume as an adult can? Okay, well, work duration certainly can handle whatever they can handle. They haven't done much yet, don't do much with them. Do something that they can handle and be sure they can handle that stress. How do we know they can handle the stress? Can they maintain or improve their performance over the course of the training session? And can they come back in the next day or two, and definitely not more than 3, and repeat that performance again? If it takes 4 days or more to repeat that performance, or they can't even do it then, whatever you're doing, you're way overdoing it. You're going to overtrain that athlete. You're going to end up with tendonitis type issues in young kids, tearing tissue. No young child should actually, anybody 17 years or older, honestly, barring some high-level sports like football and like wrestling and sports where you have this tremendous amount of contact with other athletes that's hard to control sometimes, you should not have an athlete just turn, changing direction, and tear something. That shouldn't happen. That's a training issue. That's a training issue. Could be a nutritional issue, but that's much less likely. Most likely a training issue, okay? Make sure they have proper work duration and proper volume of work. A child can lift weights. A child lifts their own body that weighs 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 pounds. They can handle a 5-pound weight in their hands if they have good technique. If the skill level's there, they can lift weights, push-ups, overhead presses, pulls, rows, strength, squats, deadlifts, lunges. If they can already control the load, that they can control that load and move it with proper skill, they can lift the weight. And don't be that person who says that body weight should be controlled first, because technically someone doing a knee extension or a leg curl, the machine says leg extension, it's a knee extension. That person, that's a much easier exercise to do than doing your own body weight in a squat. So technically, machines can be easier than actual body weight type exercises. Certainly 2 dumbbells in your hands are even much easier than doing a push-up for most people. So we don't say body weight first. That's just not true. We want to talk about loading gradually over time and building up that strength, whatever that form that might be. Skill has to be there, or they're not ready for the particular exercise stress we're giving them, regardless of age. And the risk is higher with a young athlete, but they can absolutely handle loads if they can move with great skill. Okay. Diabetic athletes, well, the greater issue is obviously insulin response and how they handle any carbohydrate taking in, or how quickly they become depleted and consequently go into shock, whereby they need carbohydrate right away, right? which is ironic when a lot of people talk about how carbs are bad for you. How can, when your body is going into hypoglycemic shock, why is it carbohydrates to be the first thing you need if it's so bad for you? Doesn't even make any sense physiologically, does it? That said, they have to have the right level of carbohydrates. Be careful the doctor who is not versed in nutrition, who does not have a dietetic background, or any individual, not to harp on a doctor, but oftentimes it's because the people use that background to say they can talk about a particular subject. It has to be your area of expertise and your area of background, or you should be referring to a professional who has that background. But carbohydrates are not the problem for diabetic individuals. The problem is the ability to handle particular level of carbohydrate or a particular type of carbohydrate, food-wise, complex versus low or a simple carbohydrate, all depending on timing, all depending on the type of athlete or not athlete. All these variances have to be understood, not just carbs good or bad. That's ridiculous. Sugar is actually a vital thing. We're talking about someone needing it for longer duration activity or longer duration stress. However, obviously, predominantly complex carbohydrates would be the ideal. And the best way to actually normalize blood sugar levels, glucose levels, and normalize those blood sugars, keeping them between that 85 to 100 level we're looking for when doing glucose testing for people who have possible diabetic type issues or hypoglycemic type issues, is cardiovascular exercise. Preferably bare minimum 20 minutes per day, but really 30 to 40 minutes per day, looking at that 50% plus VO2 max. That's what we're looking at ideally to actually maintain blood sugars better. And the type 2 diabetics, if they keep that kind of level of exercise up for 3-4 months, oftentimes people who've not been type 2 diabetic for more than maybe a year or two can no longer be type 2 diabetic potentially. They can't go back to their old ways, of course. They got to keep up with this. But you can no longer be referred to as a type 2 diabetic because you don't have those same issues anymore if you regularly engage in cardiovascular exercise. And I had 2 athletes, as well as a couple friends when I was growing up, who were engaging in regular cardiovascular exercise who were insulin dependent and we actually reported, this is subjective, right? This is actually anecdotal. This is not proven research, but something to think about, who often were saying that I don't take my insulin shots as much anymore. This regular exercise is helping me better regulate blood sugars. I don't need to actually be testing for insulin. I don't need to be taking insulin as often. That's a very much an individual thing that is looked at from a doctor's standpoint, but something for us to understand how vital exercise can be for our diabetic athletes, not just looking at just this carb thing, okay? Older athletes, sarcopenia or loss of muscle fibers or loss of size of muscle fibers after about age 50 plus starts to happen more significantly, and up to about 50% of muscle loss can be due to age. However, at least 50%, possibly more, can be gained back with proper training, preferably earlier than 50, not waiting till that age. But who knows how much they can actually gain back as far as hypertrophy, muscle fiber size. You're not going to gain new fibers, okay? If you lost fibers, they're gone. But you can actually gain size with the fibers that you have. Tissue becomes more necrotic over time if you don't utilize skills, if you don't move in similar ways you once did. The reason you often will lose as age becomes a role, as you can move later in life, why it's such a big deal, why it's so difficult to move with greater ease, or as much ease as you did back when you were younger. It's because of necrosis of tissues, whereby that tissue becomes like connective tissue. You lose that muscle fiber entirely. Now that happens slowly over time, and the way to help avoid that is to engage in regular activity, to make sure we don't have that issue, to avoid that 10% loss for every 10 years, and avoid that 50% loss of muscular strength and output, okay? But carbs daily and during after exercise, carbohydrates should be roughly speaking about 45 to 65% of the diet. It can go higher for some athletes in some situations. It shouldn't go lower than 45% unless someone's under the care of a doctor who has dietetics background, really an registered dietitian and a doctor, perfect world. If they have both basically professional backgrounds, great, right? But that said, that's generally true. And during exercise, only for exercise that's actually lasting an hour plus, that a carbohydrate beverage is about 6 to 8% carb solution, like Gatorade, every 15 to 20 minutes, 6 to 8 ounces. It's okay if you go a little bit less or a little bit more. Be careful with having too much for activities that are hour plus. Otherwise, it's just water every 10 to 15 minutes, 6 to 8 ounces. Your book first to 5 to 10 ounces in 10 to 20 minutes. So it's a broader range, but you're still looking at probably the bare minimum of about 5 ounces, 6 ounces every 10 to 15 minutes. Now I got to really be careful, I didn't put it on this particular PowerPoint, of hyponatremia. It's very popular these days. People drink way too much water, carry that gallon jug of water with them to go do their workout for a 45 hour long workout, or just because they're in the gym for longer periods, they need to be drinking that much water. Number one, if you're peeing more often than 2 hours during the course of your day, you're risking hyponatremia. If you're drinking a ton of water with your food, you're risking hyponatremia because you're washing the food right through you. Shouldn't drink more than 6 to 8 ounces of your water with your food. And of course, you shouldn't need more than top end, as we said, 8 ounces every 10 minutes, about 80 ounces over the course of an hour for someone who's hardcore getting after it, and is also probably a big person on top of that. Otherwise, a lot less water during exercise. And carbs after exercise, we're looking at, typically speaking, anywhere from that 30 to 100 gram, and even possibly more, up to about 150 grams within a couple hours after the exercise session. As soon as 15 minutes after, often recommended about 30 minutes after, because of growth hormone response. Try not to inhibit the growth hormone response, whereby if you take too much carbohydrate in, or carbohydrate of any kind in, too soon after exercise, you can possibly inhibit growth hormone, which is going to inhibit muscular growth, if that is the primary goal here for the athletes actually engaging in exercise. If you don't want to lose muscle mass, you might wait closer to about 30 minutes after exertion. 30 to 90 minutes is probably a fair window. Some would argue as much as 2 hours, still plenty of window for carb post-exercise. Okay. Protein, no more than about 20-25 grams per sitting, can be properly metabolized and utilized by the body without having to just be used as excrement and actually gastrointestinal distress, creating a lot of gas. Certainly wearing your athletes down because they're trying to digest and break down the food. We don't want to be taking in too much at one sitting. It's hard to do that. That's only technically about, at the max, about 5 ounces at most of meat, probably more like 4. Okay, and you have an 8 ounce, 12 ounce, 60 ounce piece of meat, you're well beyond that. Almost guaranteed you'll be spending more time in the bathroom, or you're just going to have some difficulty breaking it down and slowing the metabolism, not increasing it, by eating that large of food at a sitting. Okay, and about 0.8 to 1.8 grams per kilogram is a safe number. Some athletes have gone higher than that over the course of a day. Be very careful with that. Certainly, it's possible. Some would argue as much as 1 gram per pound of body weight, but that's really not well researched and well defined. So we got to be careful with those broader ranges of protein intake. Okay, as a whole. And certainly not during exercise, because protein's primary job is to rebuild tissue, build tissue, cellular building, rebuilding, regeneration, all tissues, all cells, okay, but is not for energy supplementation primarily. So that's not what's helping you. You're not getting protein post-workout for energy. You're trying to replenish energy, it's the carb you need. You're trying to worry about tissue, or you're worrying about the tissue rebuilding, it's the protein, okay? And of course, fat's primary job is hormone function. And of course, for sex hormones, it's development of testosterone. If someone's low testosterone or estrogen, progesterone, steroids, natural steroids, they're not getting the proper fats in their diet. Okay, and of course, the types you need, more monounsaturated fats, which also contain polyunsaturated fats, the nuts, the seeds, the oils, fish in particular, salmon, great one, right? And minimizing saturated fats, and really minimizing, if not possible to avoid, the trans fats. Okay. Water intake we already kind of mentioned, with a 2 hour or less often than that, about 2 hours, maybe slightly less often, but really should be as close to 2 hours as possible for knowing if you get enough water during the course of your day. And of course, we already talked about during and after exercise. That said, your posts, make sure when you write them, review them. It's clear sometimes that you post it, you're not checking through your work. Ongoing challenge for all of us as we go beyond our time as a student, let alone as our time when we're teaching and going into the real world and working and doing what we do. You got to review what you're doing, not just get it all down on paper and say, there it is for the program today we're going to run with our athletes. We've got to review that, look over it again and again and again. Now that's hard to do in a given week, I know, but at least come back one day later and at least look through it, make some changes, edit it. Okay, and if you're concerned about showing that because when you change it or edit it, it shows as though you made the post that day you're making edits, as opposed to the day you actually made it. If you're ever concerned about me giving you a grade down for per post, and just add to your post. Respond to your own post and add more. And I forgot to mention also that'll always give you more credit for your posts, as well as it's going to show you getting a better understanding of this information so you can apply it better with your athletes, which obviously I'm going to make as the primary point every single time, because that's our job, that's our goal, right? We want our athletes to perform at the highest possible level, to be able to say they did the best they could, yes, but they also got the best they could ever gotten out of themselves because of what I gave them to do, and feel good about that. Okay, if you want to be a master, you have to love review. Every athlete you can ever think of, every thinker you ever think of, somebody actually whose job is to be more mental focused opposed to physical focused, will always refer to the fact they go over and over and over the basics, and they master the basics, not worry about mastering some sort of advanced concept. The advanced stuff comes easy when you've mastered the basics. Okay. Extra credit, if you want any, the primary thing you should be doing is going back and adding to your discussion board posts. If you intend to get more credit for that, you better add a lot of information or really be really clear. You can't just write a few things down and expect it's going to give you credit. I'm going to be grading you as if that's valid information and valuable information to add to your posts. And yes, I'll give you more points for each discussion board post. If you want to write another paper, you can. Okay, in these final 2 weeks, it's a lot of work, but you can. And I will give you up to half of the points of a typical paper if you want to do that. Again, tell me you're going to do that so I know to be looking for it. If you have questions, email me, call me, but those are possibilities. I want you to do well in this class, and I want you to get the most out of it. So if it means going back and getting more from what you've once done, so be it. We'll do it. Okay? And of course, call or email me if you have questions. And we have one more week to go after this week. Okay? Keep up the hard work, and we'll talk to you again soon.